So it's time to bring you the video that no one, especially not me, has been waiting for. This is the breakdown of the third track on Rebirth, which is Sapphire Stones. Since it's been a while, as a reminder, my goal on Rebirth was to incorporate some of my blues guitar and rock and roll roots from when I first started playing guitar into a black metal album, and to write something that had sort of an improvised feeling to it. Before this, it took me a very long time to finish a song. The demo was written over the course of about a year and a half, and Insomnia was started a year prior to that. So it took almost 2.5 years for that album to come out, and there's only 5 songs on it. So, I felt that I was taking way too much time going into the tiny details of each song, tweaking things here and there, and never really reaching a point where I was satisfied with something before I released it. So I wanted to do something different and do an album where I just wrote whatever came to my mind and just took it for what it was. It was write, record, produce, and release, as opposed to grueling over every minor detail. And that's really how Rebirth came to be. As a result, this album was completed in a very short period of time. I started writing in, I think, October of 2014, and it was done in about 6 weeks. I know it was done before December, because December was when I actually sat down and I finished working on Insomnia, because I felt like I was never going to finish that album if I didn't make myself release it before Rebirth, even though Rebirth was completed before Insomnia. But anyway, the original song that was written in this spot, this third track, middle of the album, was supposed to kind of represent this entire, bluesy, semi-improvised concept. It would start off as a blues song, evolve into a hard rock, Zeppelin type song, which had been my favorite band when I first started playing guitar, and then into a heavy metal, Maiden type song, which was my favorite band when I got into heavy metal, and then eventually a black metal song, which of course was the music I discovered when I started writing. And the idea was to write a song that went through these transitions, but all using the same exact riff. The title of the song was Origins, and it was going to be about 15 to 20 minutes long, but as I kept working on it, the idea ultimately outgrew the capacity of the album itself and decided to split that off into its own concept. So in its place, I wrote a more simplified version of that song, which started from just blues and transitioned straight into black metal. The title of the song would be Sapphire Stones, which is derived as a synonym for blues rock. The song uses a 3/4 time signature opening and a drum beat that's kind of similar to Zeppelin's Since I've Been Loving You, which is the pinnacle of the genre. So this song opens with an acoustic riff, which is built on a very basic chord progression. Now that we're in a better view, the riff goes like this. So we're opening with an open strum that hammers onto an A minor. The next chord is a G, and then it goes into an F, into an upstrummed F major 7. So I'm just dropping the bar on the first string, and then back to the hammer on A minor. So the particular voicing of the chords chosen for this riff establishes this simple descending melody on the G to F transition. It goes. So when I play that in whole, you can kind of hear that. This is important later on in the song when we transition to the black metal section, which is going to be very soon, because the entire acoustic half of this song is just this riff repeated over and over again. It's a verse, solo, where in between each verses, there's a purely improvised guitar solo, which was just, hit record, play whatever came to my mind, done. So after the second solo, the song explodes into a black metal section that's more or less the same exact riff, except it's in 4/4 time with triplets, so there's a shift in time signature. But otherwise, the melody and the chord progression is very similar. That riff goes like this. So instead of open chords like before, this riff is based on tremolo picking on the lower strings. The only strings that are used on the song are the 4th and the 5th strings, so the D and A string. And the way this riff goes is we start an A power chord into an inverted G major. So inverted chords are used very heavily in the song. What I'm doing is I'm playing a chord, like a G major, but omitting the root note and substituting with either the 3rd, which is the 1st inversion, or a 5th, which is the 2nd inversion. This G chord is the 1st inversion. And it carries the melody from before, that G, F, E thing. Except now it's, in the harmony of the chord. So it's an inverted G major, and then a tritone, and then a perfect 4th. So far we have. And then the last 2 chords is, it's an inverted D power chord, which resolves by hammering back to an A power chord. So we have the same melody, that same hammer-on style, just in black metal form, if we contrast with the riff from the beginning again. Now in this section, the one thing that's different is it's not just this riff carried over and over again. There's actually a transitional riff that occurs in between verses, and again, it heavily makes use of inverted power chords. It starts like this. The first chord is an inverted F, which goes to a C power chord. The C power chord is actually functioning as an F add 9, because if I played the whole chord with the root, that instead would be this add 9 chord as opposed to being a C power chord. So that's what the chord actually is. But in this case, because we're just using the inversions on the 4th and 5th string, we're playing a C chord. So it's F to a C, back to an F, resolving to an A. And then on the repeat, it's the same thing, but resolves to an E, an inverted E power chord. And that's it. That's all the guitars for Sapphire Stones. This is a very short song guitar-wise. I'm also going to do the lyrics in this video as well, just to get everything over and done with. So the lyrics for this song are pretty similar to the rest of the album. Every song is about the cycle of birth and death. They just have their own way of telling it. So the song starts by describing a sunrise. At morning, a rooster cries out. It signals the rise of the light-bearing fire. Oceans turn blue at the sight, reflecting the hue of the sapphire sky. This verse establishes a few of the concepts that are going to be used throughout the rest of the song. We have this contrast between fire and water, sunrise and birth, ultimately, predictably, to sunset and death, which is the second verse. So that reads, a maiden calls at twilight, a message to all as supper arrives. Summer drowns in the skyline, fading the shades of her sapphire gown. So this verse is written using a technique that I made up called parallel writing, where I go back and I craft each line to reflect the equivalent line from a previous verse. And what this does is it allows me to, first of all, create some poetic imagery, and also build off of the concepts that I've established already in the previous verse, and create a more cohesive song. So you can see line by line, we start off with a rooster crying out. At morning, a rooster cries out. Then we have a maiden calls at twilight. So, the morning, twilight is kind of switched with the noun. Just a way to keep things from being too Dr. Seuss and predictable. But this verse carries over, some of the analogies from the previous verse. We have the fire and water again with the third line. Summer, which represents the sun, drowns in the skyline. This is describing the sun setting over an ocean horizon. And then the last line, fading the shades of her sapphire gown. There's a lot of internal rhyming you can see here if you read these lyrics. In the first verse, we had oceans turn blue, reflecting the hue, and here we have summer drowns, and of course at the very end, rhyming with sapphire gown. The first half of the song describes the cycle of the day. This is going to be used as an analogy for life and death in the second half, the black metal section of the song, which takes a much darker turn compared to this, kind of neutral landscape painting that's used in the first section. So the third verse goes like this. A child cries through the night, quenching the thirst of a raging inferno. Once again, you have the fire and water. Slowly the embers subside, frozen, we throw ice into the mix, frozen and lifeless, his sapphire eyes. Again, this is just building upon what has already been established previously in the song. And you can see, a repetitive structure at the end of each verse. First we have sapphire sky, sapphire gown, sapphire eyes, and then we get to the last verse. An empire burns to the ground, fire again, leaving nothing but ashes and bone, littered surrounding the throne, encircling a crown of sapphire stones. And of course we end on the title of the song. And there's supposed to be a rhyme scheme here. You can see split between the first verse and the third verse versus the second and the last one. Sapphire sky, sapphire eyes, just sapphire gown, sapphire stones, which doesn't really rhyme, but it's kind of supposed to rhyme. But there are layers to how I approach parallel writing, and the way it ends up on this song is actually kind of complex. So I really do like how the lyrics turned out, and it's kind of a shame that, I don't like listening to the song just because the way it was recorded and produced doesn't sound good to me. Lyrically, on its own, this is very much stands up to everything else that I had written at the time. So I was actually very proud of these lyrics, just didn't like the final results, and it's kind of a shame. So to recap, the first two verses establishes sunrise, sunset. The second two verses, we begin with a child, representing birth. Of course, that verse describes the death of the child. And then the final verse parallels that to an empire falling. So basically the end of civilization. And really what this song and the rest of the album is about is just, inevitable death. So that really wasn't so bad. Again, the reason I put this video off for so long is just the fact that I don't like how the song turned out. It's one of my least favorite, despite the fact that I think the black metal riff is actually pretty good. The part was actually written first, and the blues riff was created to match that in order to fit with the concept of what the song was supposed to be. In a way, the song was doomed from the start because the concept of writing something as fast as I possibly could didn't really leave enough room for it to develop fully into a complete work. So by definition, this ends up being kind of just a filler track, which for most people isn't the end of the world. Most albums are going to have filler tracks. My personal preference has always been to just withhold them. If I write something that's not up to par with the rest of the album, I'd rather not release that song and just have a shorter album. So in that respect, I do wish this was a better song. Maybe one day I'll sit back and rewrite it or redo it, which is unlikely. I'm probably just gonna do a similar type of song, but better. So that's it, it's over. Wasn't bad at all. I really shouldn't have delayed this so long just because of this song. Because I like the next song, Seer, and I'm happy to be getting on with this. It's really long overdue for me to finish this series, so I'm happy to be making some progress finally.